All right, so here we go with PPM47. Wow. From originally written March 31st, 2004. 10-year commemoration, this date, March the 31st, 2014. Busy day for me today. I've already had several Skype conversations, much of it on the future of philosophy of education, as I was speaking to some grad students about phenomenology, about their projects with technology. Very interesting. The roads, paths that will unfold in the future. And I think it's very promising. The field has a lot of good talent. So into now pages, we're up to pages 78 and 79 from Being and Learning. This is what this meditation wrote 10 years ago today corresponds to. And I'm in the middle at this point of a slow reading of the Allegory of the Cave. In his commentary on the Allegory, which we will engage below, Heidegger says, real freedom is attained only in stage 3. Here someone who has been unshackled is at the same time conveyed outside the cave into the open. There, above ground, all things are manifest. Unquote. Part 3 of the story is indeed the important moment for the liberated prisoner, for it is here that he appears to experience real freedom. He is forced up the long passage, and enduring the most shocking and disoriented experience, forced out of the subterranean cavern. For Plato, this moment is meant to convey the culmination of the flight from ignorance. The rugged ascent ends with the liberated prisoner coming to fully recognize the cave for what it is, a wholly constructed, unreal abode. His appearance from this abyss, this unreality, this space of illusion, is also a moment of disclosure, or an awakening to his own situation within the world. For the first time, he will see things as they are, and become attuned to the way of appearance, how things appear. His attunement unfolds as that gradual and painful transformation initiated when he was first compelled to stand up and turn around. He makes his way slowly, his eyes being adjusted to this new domain that is an inversion of the cave. Where all was bathed in darkness below, here in the open region all is bounded by light, which pervades all phenomena he encounters. Here in the third part of the story, the turning around, paideia, continues until he finds himself standing before the source of all the phenomena that appeared to him in the open field that he has been released upon. At this moment, the turning appears to be complete, the tuning accomplished, as he contemplates being. This important third part of the story is offered by Socrates as follows. Quote, and suppose someone were to drag him away forcibly up the steep and rugged ascent, and not let him go until he had hauled him out into the sunlight. Would he not suffer pain and vexation at such treatment, and when he had come out into the light, find his eyes so full of its radiance that he could not see a single one of the things that he was now told were real? Asked Socrates. Certainly he would not see them all at once, replied Glaucon. He would need then to grow accustomed before he could see things in the upper world. At first it would be easier to make out shadows, and then the things of men and things reflected in the water, and later on the things themselves. After that it would be easier to watch the heavenly bodies in the sky itself by night, looking at the light of the moon and stars rather than the sun and the sun's light in daytime. Socrates. Yes, surely, Glaucon. Last of all, he would be able to look up at the sun and contemplate its nature, not as it appears when reflected in water or in any alien medium, but as it is in itself in its own domain. Socrates. No doubt, Glaucon replied. And now he would begin to draw the conclusion that it is the sun that produces the seasons and the courses of the year and controls everything in the visible world, and moreover, it is in a way the cause of all that his companions used to see. Socrates. Clearly, he would come at last to this conclusion, said Glaucon. Part 3 of the allegory begins with an unnamed, voiceless liberator dragging the liberated prisoner out of the cave. While we will explore further this identity of this mysterious liberator, it's important to note as we listen to the story unfold the type of force that is required to draw the released prisoner out of the cave. In the second part of the story, Socrates tells us that the released prisoner's reaction to the initial turning would be to turn back, to recoil from the disorientation and rush back to the comforts of his bondage. The stark physical limitations of one who has never stood nor walked is, of course, an important element of the third part of the story. It's clear for anyone hearing the story that the one who is released could hardly walk and certainly require assistance to make an ascent up the long and steep passageway. The dragging and hauling suggests that the apprentice who is to be drawn out of and away from the comforts of their domestic habituation will do so with much trepidation. The comfort and security of habit is not easily abandoned, and we refer here not simply to the anxiety and the foreboding that emerges from the disorienting and estranging perceptions. More important is the incapacity of the novitiate to take these first steps, to get underway and begin the process of movement that will lead him outside and into the open. The journey of purposeful wandering will only be made when and if the apprentice is helped to find his way to the portal that will take him into the open region. By himself, he is incapable of taking these initial steps, much less attempt a rugged ascent. Plato's impatience with those closed to learning is heard in a rather harsh way when he describes the help that is offered by the mysterious liberator. This part of the story can be heard as a dissonant moment, for it must be the case that this process of liberation is moved by care and hope. Plato is perhaps attempting to show the power of force which causes the turning. It is capable of carrying the novitiate until the process of adjustment is complete and he's able to stand upon his own 2 feet unassisted. Such a force is alone capable of breaking the chains of bondage and releasing others into the open region where learning gets underway. And that's how I ended it. The last day of March 24, and on this day, the last day of March 2014. And it's interesting because I was just now speaking to my colleague Sam Rocha, and we were talking about, he's talking about his class that he's teaching, and how they're kind of lost, and they feel disoriented, and they feel in some ways that they are not sure of what they're supposed to do. And he was telling me that, you know, what struck him as really fascinating about that is that he feels as if they've never been asked to make something that's their own, that is to say, to think their own ideas. And that's the challenge that he's given them with the work that he's having them do in his class in philosophy of education. And my response was to understand very well what he was talking about and to say, yeah, you know, I encounter this all the time. But in fact, it seems to me that that's exactly where we enter into the stage. That's where the teacher, the one I call the sage, that's where they enter into the scene. And that's where they have to stay. Or rather, they're always there. The students wouldn't be disoriented and they wouldn't feel abandoned or confused or whatever. Like he didn't use the word abandoned, but that's what I was feeling when he was making that point. That's what I was perceiving from their point of view as he was telling me what they were saying. They wouldn't be wandering around in what appears to be an aimless direction if it weren't for the presence of one of us, who sort of pushed them along the way who made an offering to them to think, and then sort of initiated thinking. But this is the point, I think, of this part of the discussion of the allegory of the cave. Someone, whomever this is, this mysterious liberator, arrived into the cave, and by some force, a force powerful enough to break the chains and to pick this one up and to force them to turn around and to move them up and out of the cave. That's a powerful force. It's their presence, their arrival, and the force that they bring, the power that they bring that enables all this to happen. But what's important to me, very important, and this is something I've been trying to address, or did address, in the writing that's led up to this point, is that this one, call him or her the sage teacher, evocative teacher, philosophical educator, they can't leave the scene and never will leave the scene. They are responsible. This is what Arendt calls the authority of the educator, and by that she means moral authority, to take responsibility for what's happening and to not leave the students to their quote-unquote own devices. So the wandering is led by the sage. In this case, the ascent from the cave is led by, and in fact is propelled by, this mysterious liberator. We can't leave our students to their own devices, especially when we are introducing them, or I would say recalling to them, turning them around to something that's so fundamental, that is the most fundamental. Their possibility, their freedom, the freedom that's offered to them, the human condition of freedom. It's not theirs, it's their, instead of T-H-E-I-R, apostrophe S, T-H-E-R-E, the there, da, their being. Their being, the most fundamental their being, is their being freedom. They make it their own insofar as they have this effacement with it and then do something with it. This is what I call learning. But once that's shown to them, once that offering, the there, that is human freedom, is disclosed to them because we turn them to that disclosure. We're not the ones disclosing it. Right? I think that's the point that I've been trying to emphasize. The sage is a pointer, the sage evokes, the sage turns, but this is not education by transmission. The only transmission that's going on is the transmission of communication. The interpolation, if you will. Hey, you're a thinker. Turn around. Check it out. So what's key here then is that not only the force, the power that enables that all to happen, but the responsibility that comes with that. Can't introduce learning, the ontological condition of learning, without helping people to negotiate what that's about. So we can't just put people off on their own. We can't just pick them up, say, there's the open field, run with it. It has to be a very careful introduction. And I suggested in some recent work, it has to be something that enables them to encounter that power of the tradition. I mean, for me, the power, I haven't written that in this part of being and learning, nor in the original doesn't have it, but the force, of course, is the force of the offering. The disclosure, the arrival of that disclosure, that's where the force and the power comes from. And then that's the account of that is what we can call philosophy, very generally speaking. And it is the taking up of those responses, that is to say, the reading and study of philosophy in its written form, in its form produced through music, art, that our encounter with those forms of philosophical production, those examples of philosophical production, which again is different from manufacturing, very different. Think here of crafting, home brew as opposed to Budweiser, if you will. The crafting and the production that we take up, the works of philosophy that we take up, convey the power. And so our first encounter with that power manifested through human hands and the human heart, that sort of initiates us into how we might go about it. And I could see where one would think that there might be, well, that then becomes the whole question of originality and that whole struggle to make something unique, truly unique. But I'm all for the introduction of what has been done before, so as to give students the opportunity to become acquainted with what's been done before, and then to recognize the spectrum of possibilities that they can undertake, all these different possibilities, all these different forms, and then try to make something of their own. But first and foremost, they have to have studied and encountered the manifestations of the work. And it's our responsibility then to both introduce them to this possibility, but to also be quite careful and mindful in our selection of the work that we have them study. Right? So like a good archivist, we need to select the vintage best examples from the archives to show our students. And I think when we do that, what I'm suggesting is that we enable them to see what's possible and not get overwhelmed by the task at hand. And I'm going to leave it at that. Until tomorrow.